Good day, dear students. This is your presentation for Social Science 6 for 2022. I'm your tutor, Mr. R.N. Dishena. My details are displayed on the screen. Welcome to the Bachelor of Education, Senior Primary Social Science 6 presentation. Please note this presentation covers the subject content in summary for the 2022 April, August and November examination, and is by no means a scope for the examination. Therefore, you are expected to thoroughly do your reading. All examination questions in these subjects are compulsory. Unit 1. Unit 1 in this subject cover the following. Discuss the features and meaning of world peace treaties between 1919 and 1923 and the League of Nations. Here you are expected to outline what history is and its specific aims. You are also expected to describe Europe before and after World War I and critically analyze the Treaty of Versailles and its impact on Germany. In this unit, you are also expected to describe the League of Nations. What was this League of Nations? Why was it brought into existence and what role did it play? You are also expected to highlight the success and failures of the League of Nations and discuss prominent features and meanings of world peace treaties between 1919 and 1923 and the League of Nations. Dear students, I have to alert you here that this requires a lot of reading and serious understanding because it has a lot of background history. Unit 2. This one deals with the causes for the collapse of international peace by 1939. What causes the peace that was then in the world? Excuse me for that. Here you have to deal with the causes for the collapse of international peace by 1939. Here you are expected to explain the long-term consequences of peace treaties versus the collapse of world peace, meaning there was peace and there was suddenly a collapse of that peace. What causes that? That is what you are expected to outline and identify. Then you are expected to identify the failures of the League of Nations. In what aspect did the League of Nations fail? You are also expected to highlight the influence of the League of Nations on the collapse of peace. Remember, in the first bullet, we spoke about the collapse of peace. So what role did the League of Nations play with regard to the collapse of world peace? You are very key here. You are expected to explain Hitler's foreign policy and the rearmament policy because this is part of what caused the world peace to collapse. You really need to read about it and understand it. And then you are also expected to identify other treaties and agreements that were in place. Unit 3, here you have to deal with the origins of Cold War and relations during the period of the Cold War. You need to understand what this Cold War is all about. I have realized that quite a couple of students were not able to understand or explain what the Cold War was in the previous exams. Here you are expected to give an explanation of what Cold War is and its origin. And then also identify the specific role players in the Cold War. All this information is nicely displayed in our resource books, so it's a question of really reading, understanding, and analyzing what is written. You are also expected to explain the formation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact and explain the scenario of the end of Cold War and the fall of communism. How did communism come to an end and how did Cold War also come to an end? Unit 4, the structures and operation of the United Nations organizations. Here you are expected to provide a background and purpose for the United Nations organization. In other words, you must understand why the UNO was started, who were the role players, and it was started for which specifications. You are also expected to explain the structure and functions of the various bodies of the United Nations organization. What are those bodies that are there and what functions are they serving? Analyze the role of the UN in the Congo. The UN was put to test in the Congo. So as a social science student, you should be able to analyze how the UN was put to test here and to explain whether it failed or succeeded in executing what was given to it. You are also expected to analyze the role of the United Nations organization in North Korea. Another test that was put before the United Nations organization was the issue of North Korea. So you should read about what happened there and be able to analyze whether the UNO really played its expected role. You are also expected to outline the success and failure of the United Nations organization. In general, did the UN fail or did it succeed in its mandate? Unit 5. Unit 5 deals with issues of the Namibian history from 1884 and 1990. That is the year of independence. Now please keep in mind 1884, the Berlin Conference, 1990, our independence. Take it from that point of view. Here you are expected to narrate the German colonial rule of Namibia between 1884 and 1914. How was Namibia under the German occupation during that specific period of time? That is what you are expected to understand. You are also expected to explain the Herrera and Namakua wars. You are expected, in this regard, you should be able to identify how these specific wars came into being, what were the reasons why these wars took place, and precisely what happened during that specific war and at the end of that specific war. You need to understand those aspects. You are also expected to explain the following. Namibia as a South African mandate territory, 1919 to 1948. What was a mandate territory and how did it happen that Namibia became a mandate territory for South Africa? You are also expected to explain Namibia as a mandate territory after the 1919 Versailles Conference. That conference took place in 1919, so how was Namibia then as a mandate territory? You are also expected to explain Namibia, South Africa, and the United Nations after 1948. What was the relationship between Namibia, South Africa, and the United Nations in 1948 or after 1948? And why in particular 1948? That you need to find out as a social science student. You should also be able to highlight apartheid features and its impact on Namibians. What were these features that were key in the apartheid era, and how did they impact Namibians in general? You should be able to differentiate the conditions at independence and post-independence in Namibia. You should be able to differentiate the conditions at independence. How was Namibia at independence and how is Namibia after independence? You should be able to analyze the conditions in the two specific periods of time. Unit 6 deals with political development in South Africa and Southern Africa that is now between 1948 and 1990. Here you are expected to analyze apartheid laws in Southern Africa and highlight its collapse. Please note apartheid laws in Southern Africa and highlight its collapse. What were these laws and how did they collapse? And what precisely caused the collapse of the apartheid laws? You should be able to explain what armed resistance against apartheid during the period of 1960 to 1989 was. there was a lot of resistance towards South African governance between 1960 and 1989, just before independence. You should be able to explain what these armed resistance were and what was happening. You should also be able to discuss what black consciousness was and how it dismantled apartheid in South Africa. Here you can make references to people like Steve Biko and others, what role they play, and precisely what was this black consciousness movement and what role it played in dismantling the apartheid rule in South Africa. You are expected to explain nationalism in Southern Africa, Zambia, and Botswana. Remember, in one of our modules, we had to explain what nationalism is with specific reference to Namibia. In this case, you should be able to explain then further what nationalism is in Southern Africa, but with specific references to Zambia and Botswana. You should be able to analyze the role of Kenneth Kaunda and that of SC32 in the struggle for independence. This is the Kenneth Kaunda in Zambia and SC32 in Botswana. What role did they play in the struggle for independence, both in their countries and in Southern Africa in general? Unit 7, the Wema Republic and the Nazi Party rule of Germany, 1934 to 1945. In this unit, you are expected to understand or be able to discuss how Germany reacted to the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, the Treaty of Versailles is a treaty that brought the First World War to end, and conditions were put up for Germany. And now you have to discuss how Germany reacts to the treaties, to these specific treaties, Treaty of Versailles. You should also be able to explain how the Wema Republic was established in 1918, explain the years of world crisis 1919 to 1923. The world was in crisis both economically and also the absence of peace between this period of time. You should be able to explain how this crisis were affecting the world. You should be able to explain the golden era of 1924 to 1929 in Germany. That was a specific period of time where Germany was really doing well economically on face value, although there were other problems that were possibly or probably hidden. So you should be able to explain what was this golden era in Germany and who played this specific role here. What causes the economic decline between the period of 1930 and 1933 globally? What causes the economic decline between that period of time? And you should be able to examine the role of Hitler and his Nazi party in Germany. Unit 8. This deals with aspects of the history of the United States between 1914 and 1941. Here you are expected to evaluate the USA economy during the first 2 decades of the 20th century, meaning you have to evaluate the US economy. How was the US economy during this specific time? You are also expected to illustrate the relationship between President Delano D. Roosevelt and the New Deal in the US. Before you understand this specific relationship, you need to understand first what this New Deal was in the USA, and also need to understand a bit of background of President Delano D. Roosevelt. You also have to evaluate the effectiveness of the New Deal, what is highlighted in the previous bullet, in addressing the Great Depression. Again, before you understand and evaluate the effectiveness of the New Deal, you need to understand what the Great Depression was. Unit 9. Unit 9 deals with Western imperialism in some African countries, specific reference to Zimbabwe and Algeria. Before you try to analyze and understand this unit, you need to understand first what is imperialism, because it will be key in understanding the rest of the unit. Here you are expected to analyze the colonial era, 1888 to 1965, in Southern Rhodesia and the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. And then clarify the question of settlers' colony in 1890 and 1923. Clarify the origin and rise of black nationalism. Understand here, clarify the origin and rise of black nationalism. So there is an origin and there is a rise to black nationalism between the period of 1959 to 1979. You are expected to outline the French rule in Algeria. In other words, when Algeria was under the colonial rule of French, how was it in Algeria? You should be able to analyze the rise of Algerian nationalism or nationalist and the French resistance after 1914, and be able to describe the Algerian War of Independence between 1954 and 1962. Having understood and analyzed this, you should then be able to critically discuss the French administration in Algeria and examine Charles de Gaulle's role in Algeria. So this is a key moment in some of our African countries, and it needs to be understood because it is key to understanding the further part of the units. Unit 10. Unit 10, you have skills for historians. Who are these historians we are talking about? In other words, you need to understand who historians are and also clarify what history is. What is history? Analyze the functions of historians. But before you analyze their function, you need to know who they are before you analyze their functions. You should also be able to differentiate between the past and history. Is there a difference between the past and history, or is it the same thing? As a social science student, you should be able to make that distinctive difference between the past, between what past is, and between what past is and what history is. You should also be able to identify the types of sources in history. As historians, where do we get what are our sources? You should be able to outline key concepts and skills in history. What are key concepts in history? And what are the skills that are needed in order to understand history and be able to present history? And you are expected to outline the importance of research and referencing in history. Very important, especially at our level where you have to do research. You need to understand or be able to outline the importance of research and referencing in history. That was the end of the presentation. Good luck for the exam and all the best. Thank you.